Mrs. Wilson had never been so happy to shake her whole body for a meal. According to the foreman, she had been busy in the supermarket, and at 7 o'clock in the evening, she finally received the meal coupon she was thinking of. Although she had already had a full meal at noon, Mrs. Wilson still looked like a hungry dog that had been confined for 3 days with this meal in the dining hall. She had a big belly and couldn't stand up. She couldn't eat anymore. She rested on the canteen seat for half an hour before she stood up reluctantly with her hands on the table. After eating and drinking, the whole person has energy. Mrs. Wilson wiped her mouth with the back of her hand, and touched her belly with the palm of her hand, feeling satisfied with herself. Unexpectedly, eating after this labor is so delicious. Today I had enough to eat. Immediately, she checked the time and realized that it was already past 8 o'clock, so she planned to go home quickly. Although she has always been selfish, after experiencing all the hardships and difficulties during this period, she has more or less cared about her children and grandchildren. Thinking of her son and grandson still lying in bed waiting to be fed, Mrs. Wilson hurried to the cafeteria window and asked the staff member who was about to leave work, "Excuse me, do you still need these leftovers, steamed buns, and rice?" The other person looked at her and said helplessly, "Isn't it, old lady, you have eaten 3 people's meal alone, and you haven't eaten enough?" Mrs. Wilson wiped her mouth in embarrassment and said with a grin, "Hey, I'm full and the children in the family are still hungry. Do you know, they haven't eaten anything for almost 2 days and nights?" The other party asked in surprise, "Really? When is there still someone who can't eat?" Mrs. Wilson had a hot face and said embarrassedly, "Hey, something happened to my family during this period of time. The eldest daughter-in-law in the family has breast cancer. It is found to be at an advanced stage. The ball is about to die. My eldest son spent all the money at home in order to treat her illness." With that said, Mrs. Wilson suddenly felt very refreshed in her heart. It's really cool. She had long seen Horia not pleasing to her eyes. If Ragnar hadn't stopped her, then she herself would have wanted to beat Horia to death. Especially recently, Horia has disobeyed her in various ways and even forced her to work. She has long hated her for this in her heart. Therefore, in front of others, fabricating the rumor that Horia was dying of breast cancer made her feel the pleasure of revenge. When the staff in the cafeteria heard this, they suddenly exclaimed, "Huh? Advanced breast cancer, that would be too miserable, that's not a big deal." Mrs. Wilson sighed, "Hey, my eldest daughter-in-law has advanced breast cancer, and my second daughter-in-law is even more miserable." The staff member hurriedly asked, "Lady, what happened to your second daughter-in-law?" Mrs. Wilson said with regret, "Second daughter-in-law has uremia and lives on dialysis all day long. However, on the way to the hospital for dialysis some time ago, she was hit by a car, and her limbs are amputated under her ass." The staff were scared and stupefied. "Is this not so miserable?" Mrs. Wilson said with a face. "What's this? What's worse is yet to come." The staff asked. "What could be worse?" Mrs. Wilson said with emotion. "My second daughter-in-law, she had to go to the hospital for dialysis if her leg was gone. It was miserable, but she got a stroke again. Now she has a crooked mouth." When talking about Elaine, Mrs. Wilson felt more resentful in her heart. She wished that Elaine was really as miserable as the one she arranged. She even hopes that the more miserable she is, the better. However, the staff did not know that she was just talking about it. The staff felt that normal people, who would curse their family members out of nothing. So what the old lady said must be the truth. So she said with great sympathy, "No wonder you at this age still come out to work. It's really not easy for you to have things like this one after another at home." As she said, she continued, "Lady, we have 7 or 8 buns left here, almost 4 rice, and some leftovers. Do you have a lunchbox? I'll pack it for you and you can take it home." Mrs. Wilson was very excited, but she still suppressed her ecstasy, and said with a melancholy expression, "How can I have a lunchbox? My daughter-in-law is dying, I can't afford that stuff." With that said, the old lady saw the plastic bag hanging on the side of the counter, and blurted out, "Why don't you do it, big girl? You put all the leftovers in plastic bags for me, I'll take them home." The staff nodded hurriedly and said, "I'm fine, as long as you don't dislike it." Mrs. Wilson hurriedly said, "Don't dislike it, there is no such thing." Soon, the staff took out the leftovers for Mrs. Wilson, and packed 4 large plastic bags. She felt a little regretted when she got started, thinking, "With so many leftovers, it's too damn heavy. How can I carry it back?" But then she thought about it. "No, I have to take everything. With this food, the family can last for at least 2 days, otherwise, what is enough to rely on the 100 earned today?" Thinking of this, she could only thank the staff, and gritted her teeth and took the 4 big bags of food home. On the way back, Mrs. Wilson was not willing to take a taxi. It takes a lot of money to take a taxi home from here, and the 100 she made for a whole day of hard work, maybe half of it will be lost to a taxi. After much deliberation, it is better to take the bus. So, she bought 2 ham sausages at a roadside store, thinking about using ham sausages to make up for Noah and Harold, just to give the change to take the bus driver. On the bus, other old people swiped their old people's card to ride for free. Mrs. Wilson didn't have one, so she could only put $1 in the coin box. In fact, she had known for a long time that when the elderly with local household registration reached 65 years of age, they could go to the Civil Affairs Department to get a free bus ride for the elderly. However, Mrs. Wilson never took the bus when she went out. She had a full-time driver with a dedicated car. At that time, how could she deserve the free bus card for the elderly? For her at that time, let alone using this card, even if it was used, it was a shame. But now she regrets it, and at the same time she muttered in her heart, "It seems that after the Chinese New Year, when people go to work, I should hurry to get the card for the elderly, so at least I don't need to pay the bus and save some money each day. This way I can save a lot in 1 month." Carrying a few large bags of food, Mrs. Wilson finally returned to the Thompson villa. Walking into the entrance of Thompson, when she was about to brush the gates, a well-dressed middle-aged woman pinched her nose and shouted at her, "Where is the old lady? Coming here with a swill? Do you know what this is? Not such a place? This is Thompson. You can't afford to buy any house here for several lifetimes." Mrs. Wilson was vomiting blood tiredly. Seeing a woman who had popped out from somewhere, she yelled at her, and suddenly cursed, "Fuck your mother. Do you know where the old mother lives? I live in Villa A04. If you look at your bird, it looks like a pheasant, and I think you live on the outer flat floor at most." As soon as the woman heard this, she rushed in angrily, slapped Mrs. Wilson directly, and cursed, "Dead old lady, the old lady's set of more than 20 million flat layers, you fucking dare to laugh at me? You are so poor, and you dare to say that you live in a villa, you fucking deserve it too?"